This webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the Highstead website along with all the previous sessions in this series. I want to welcome you today. My name is Tara Whalen. I'm of the Highstead Foundation, and I'm excited to introduce the fifth and final session of the Conservation Finance Learning Lab. Thank you all for joining us today, and thanks to my co-hosts Lee Welpton and Jackson Moeller from the Conservation Finance Network team for their partnership in building and delivering this series. Before I turn it over to Lee, I want to thank the Highstead team who has been working behind the scenes to bring you this series. Jody Kaloji, Jean Ammermuller, Twassert Vaughn, Fiona Lunt, and Jackie Wrigley. And with that, I'll turn it over to Lee to run you through a little recap of what we've learned so far during this series.
Thanks, Tara, and welcome everybody. Oops. Could folks hear me, or was that muted?
You're muted.
You're good now.
Okay, welcome folks to today's Dolphin Tank, a live action role play Deal Doctor with input from a friendly pod of expert dolphins. I'm Lee Welpton, Executive Director of the Conservation Finance Network, where our fundamental business is really about expanding people's capacity, connections, and confidence to execute on their own conservation finance challenges and solutions. Our aim is to really bridge sectors and silos and help people find the capital they need to advance the pace and scale of their own efforts. Really thrilled for today's session. This is the cherry on top of the sundae, or the capstone, if you will, where we actually get to do some project deal doctoring and help move real efforts forward in real time. Before we jump into the session though, I just wanted to flag a couple other opportunities to engage with conservation finance and the network virtually. One of those is coming up here on May 12th. It's our 9th annual Conservation Finance Conference with Credit Suisse, Cornell Atkinson Center for Sustainability, Equilibrium, Lime Timber, and Seal and Associates. We'll put the link for the virtual version of that event in the chat box here in a minute. Also, our 16th annual Conservation Finance Bootcamp training course being held June 27th to July 1st in partnership with Colorado State University and the University of Wyoming. The deadline has unfortunately closed for in-person applicants, but the virtual version of the event will feature 4 core content sessions that we're going to be live broadcasting from the classroom. So we'll put a link in for that as well. And just really to echo Tara here with thanks for the Highstead team, for my colleague Jackson, and of course for everyone joining us today, especially our dolphins, and even more especially the very brave participants who are going to be talking about their work. Our hope overall is really that this Learning Lab series has provided you with some practical insight and guidance to try something new, to pick up the phone, to call someone, to start building the relationships and information you need to actually secure capital and advance your own project efforts. It also helps us immensely to hear from you. So if this is something you'd like us to offer again, this Learning Lab series, please, please, please let Tara and me know. You can email us directly. If you don't have our emails, we'll also put those in the chat momentarily. And just to give you a sense of the ground we've covered since December now, and to remind you that all of these session recordings are available on the website and can and should be shared broadly with your friends and colleagues. We started this series off with a conversation about how you structure transactions to broaden partnerships, and by doing so, funding sources, oftentimes not just because it's the pragmatic thing to do, but also because it's the right thing to do. We then traveled over into the crazy universe we're in at the moment of public funding. So turning over rocks and thinking about underutilized or emerging sources of public funding or new allocations therein. We flipped over into the power of debt in something that we very humbly called borrowing money to save the world, and really dug into bridge finance and other debt strategies for land and resource conservation. And then the last session, if you joined us last month, was really about corporate engagement digging into how you sell your project, what matters currently in the kind of current universe of corporate fundraising and philanthropic engagement, and with some really practical tools and tips for how you make the pitch. So here we are today, again, cherry on top of the sundae with our Dolphin Tank structuring workshop. And with that, I'll hit the pause button on myself and pass things over to my colleague Jackson to introduce today's speakers.
Thanks, Lee. You described it as the cherry on top. I like to think of it as the Super Bowl as a sports nut myself. But what I love about this session is that it's action-oriented advice and not theoretical or academic, but what are the real issues that people are facing on the ground and how can we nudge it forward with advice? And so I'd like the panelists, you've got them up on the screen here, each of you just to provide a sentence or two about your name, your title, and what you've got going on as part of your role. And so I'm just going to cold call my old colleague Galen, just get things started with that introduction.
Awesome. Thanks, Jackson. Hello, all. Really wonderful to meet you all and happy to be here. My name is Galen Guerrero Murphy. I'm the Land Conservation Program Manager with the Colorado chapter of the Nature Conservancy, where I've led a number of large ranch protection transactions under our Purchase, Protect, Resell conservation strategy. In my position, I've also been directing our Southern High Plains initiative, which we've been developing with partners across large parts of eastern Colorado and New Mexico, western Kansas and Oklahoma, and the Texas Panhandle, where this little part of the world hosts some of the best remaining grasslands around. So wonderful to meet y'all and look forward to talking more.
Thanks, Galen. Sherry?
Hi, everyone. I'm Sherry Carney, and I am with Columbia Land Trust, and I work in Oregon and Washington along the Columbia River, the lower 200 or so miles of the Columbia River. Columbia Land Trust is a regional land trust, and my role is landscape scale, large scale collaborative forest conservation, very much what Lee was describing as far as really achieving conservation for both forestry and forests in this part of the world.
Thanks, Sherry. Dan, you're up next.
Hi, everyone. Dan Winterson. I'm with the Gordon Betty Moore Foundation. Work in conservation finance for the foundation, focusing out here in California currently. Before that, I worked internationally, primarily in South America. And before Moore Foundation, I worked for McKinsey & Company, doing management and strategy consulting for corporations, private equity firms, but also some nonprofits as well.
Thanks, Dan. Maki?
Hi, I'm Maki. I'm the co-founder and director for Climate Raise, an initiative that helps women-led climate tech company. And I was most recently with the Techstar Sustainability Accelerator in partnership with the Nature Conservancy, which worked with early stage climate tech companies, helping build their businesses. And before that, I used to work with family offices in the natural capital investing space.
Hi, everyone. Todd Gartner calling in from Durango, Colorado. I direct the Cities for Forest Natural Infrastructure Initiative at the World Resources Institute. I lead much of our conservation finance work. We've helped develop green bonds for land protection. We're a co-developer of the Forest Resilience Bond, working with Summit County, Utah on setting up an endowment fund for conservation outcomes, and broadly work with corporations, financing institutions, and practitioners to get where we need to be, bigger, better, faster. Looking forward to this. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Todd. So we've got a fantastic group here of dolphins, expert dolphins, to give advice. And I'm very appreciative of you guys giving that advice. The real stars of the show are the presenters who have the courage and the bravery to pitch their project and their problem and their approach to solving the problem before a large audience. And so I want to thank Steph from 3 Degrees and Anne from Forever Our Rivers and Christina and John from Rensselaer Land Trust. Before I hand it off to the first one, Anne, I just want to give a little logistics of what's happening for the remainder of our time here. Each presenter is going to get 10 minutes to, again, present the problem that they're facing and then share their approach to solving that issue. I'm also going to give a 2-minute warning just so you can have some time to wrap it up. And then the Dolphins will have 10 to 15 minutes to provide feedback, but also ask clarifying questions and potential connections. And also, you folks in the audience, welcome your feedback in the chat. I will capture all of those messages in the chat and share with each of the presenters afterwards with the recording. And so don't just sit back and listen, but actively engage and share your thoughts in the chat as well. Let's see. So with that said, I guess I'll have Anne, you share your screen and start getting set up. And,
all right.
And so, yeah, 10 minutes, I'll give a 2-minute warning, a friendly Dolphin 2-minute warning, and we'll get going from there.
All right, can everybody see my screen and hear me okay? I'm gonna assume yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
Great. Well, my name is Ann Johnston. I'm the director of Forever Our Rivers. I really appreciate this opportunity today. I want to thank everyone in advance for the feedback. Forever Our Rivers was formed by a group of conservation practitioners to address a large funding gap for monitoring and maintenance for river restoration projects. It isn't flashy work, but restoration needs to be monitored and maintained for years to reach its full potential. As former practitioners, our founders also wanted to find new sources of funding. So they were amplifying the efforts of nonprofits rather than competing with them. They worked with a consultant to execute a proof of concept in 2018. Through this process, businesses who had a direct or indirect tie to rivers were interviewed to see if they would be willing to share a portion of their operating revenue to a nonprofit that was solely focused on protecting rivers. The study found that the concept was solid, and there was likely to be interest and engagement from a meaningful amount of customers and businesses. The Walton Family Foundation also showed an interest in the concept. They themselves had spent millions and millions of dollars on rivers in the Southwest and knew that sustained funding for monitoring and maintenance would further leverage their efforts. In 2021, Forever Our Rivers launched a dedicated monitoring and maintenance grant program with significant support from the Walton Family Foundation. Funding is only available to these 4 watersheds, all of which drain into the Colorado River. Prior to launching this program, we asked the local nonprofits to project their monitoring and maintenance costs through 2025. The nonprofits understood that they would be responsible for bringing a 50% match to their grant requests each year. From those nonprofit projections, we determined that we needed to raise $5 million to create an enduring 10-year program. We also created a less restricted community grants program. This program funds river conservation more generally and with an emphasis on diversity, equity, and inclusion. It also funds access and recreation. This fund is small and grants approximately $100,000 a year. Currently, it is funded largely through individual donations, although we hope to find business partners to grow this program. Grantees are nonprofits that have been vetted and they are then officially approved as river partners. There is a lot of demand for this program. The need for the funding is demonstrated. We have decided to temporarily limit the number of river partners that we accept so that we can increase the amount of the grant award for each current partner from last year's $5,000 cap to a new cap of $10,000 this year. While this makes the grants more meaningful for the nonprofit partners, it also reduces our impact and our storytelling opportunities. For nonprofits that are not yet official river partners but are interested in becoming one and thus eligible for this grant, we are creating a wait list and hope to use that wait list to incentivize our fundraising program. So this is our startup model. This is our trademark logo, which corporations can use to demonstrate their support. Our initial goals were to acquire 40 corporate partners in 2021, 3 of which would be companies with annual revenues exceeding $100 million. We planned for a staff of 3 full-time equivalents and 6 months of operating reserves. We also plan to grow geographically. In our first few years, we were challenged by an executive director turnover and the pandemic. Businesses also faced uncertainties. So while we have had many successes, including raising funds for staff capacity, the fundraising goals and growth projections using the royalty model were not met. We currently have 15 corporate partners. Most of them are smaller regional. We have found that we must negotiate with our partners and offer alternative ways to give, different ways than the royalties fee, including regular donations, grants, or the sale of a product for which we get a percentage. We had hoped that product manufacturers would incorporate our logo on their products so that it would be seen by consumers in stores. However, for both large and small businesses, we have been getting feedback that changing a product logo to include our graphic is expensive. Not surprisingly, we also found that it is important for businesses to have projects funded in areas they work or areas where they have offices. They are also looking to engage our nonprofit partners to get volunteers on the ground for their corporate days of service. For the last fiscal year, our fundraising came in approximately 80% through foundations, and 20% pretty equally shared between corporations and individuals. I joined Forever Our Rivers as the executive director in January of this year. As we move forward and review our model, one idea is to delay expansion and stay focused on the Southwest and reconsider growth after we meet certain metrics. For example, after we raise our first $2.5 million, or after we sign a certain number of corporate partners. We understand that we need to identify a strategy for growth. We also need to enhance our messaging and promote the value that we bring to the table. And we need to expand our fundraising and utilize the full slate of traditional opportunities through individual giving. At the same time, we do want to continue with our royalties effort. We also feel there's a need to create at least one advisory board for the community grants program. If we really want to address DEI issues and move conservation towards more equity, then we need to find the right voices at the table. So here are my list of questions. I started out with quite a bit more, and I'm not sure the best way to proceed here, but the first couple of questions are all basically focused on how can we get ourselves more solidified to grow and also to be able to show metrics that are going to be important for corporations or individuals who want to join our movement. And the second one are questions about what kind of certification or metrics we can show to corporations specifically so that we can demonstrate to the public why they're involved with us, and also they can demonstrate to their board of directors why they're giving money to us and what metrics that's helping them. So I'm not sure, Jackson, if this would be better for the Dolphins to pick some of these questions they'd like to answer, or if we just start at the top.
This is a fantastic outline of the issue, the problem statement, and some of your paths forward. So I think this is a great spot just for Todd and Dan and Maki and Sherry and Galen just to either respond to a question here or ask some clarifying questions that might be helpful to get better feedback. But I open it up to the Dolphins.
Hi, Ann. Good to see you again. I don't know if you remember working with me when you were out at the Sonoma Land Trust.
I do.
I guess just a couple of clarifying questions. It seems like you are trying to develop kind of an intermediary strategy here where kind of like a resources legacy fund or something along those lines, where you're going to raise money from others and then direct it to nonprofits.
Yes.
So one thing I think would be helpful is just to hear a little bit more about the value add that you're doing. So if I'm a foundation, or I do actually work for a foundation, why would I give money through you rather than directly to the nonprofits, for instance?
I think, yeah, that is a really great question, and something that we realize that we need to message a little bit better. So what we are doing is we're coming from basically at this point, while we're small at any rate, we can say that 100% of our board and our staff are former practitioners. So we know the region, we know the projects, we know that the nonprofits don't have the capacity necessarily to go out and do, certainly not to seek royalties from corporations, but they have some capacities with fundraising resources. So we feel like we can be the person who collects funds and aids them. So a big fundraiser for our nonprofits. And then also, a lot of the corporations that we have talked to, that I've talked to in my brief time here, they know what they want to fund, but they don't know the names and the faces and the capacities of the nonprofits. So we can go through and vet those nonprofits and simplify that effort, saving them a lot of time and just being more efficient.
Yeah, and I would double down on Dan's question as a great one, and just trying to highlight that expertise that you mentioned there and the background that you all have as former practitioners, and trying to find the stories of the local nonprofits that you are working with about why they love working with you all specifically.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I found, hi, Anne. I found myself on the third bullet, just as I was listening, reflecting on, so you had the 20% at this point, which I understood to be half individuals and half corporate.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So with your third bullet of, just how do we measure it? And then also whether or not it is a viable strategy. So I wondered if you have a point at which you reevaluate and say, we're going to push in a different direction.
Do you mean push in a different direction?
For corporate, so pursuing the corporate royalties,
yes,
and corporate giving that would be sustainable and invested. Your questions are around, okay, how do we? It didn't really take early on. It sounded like very well, and you've got a few blocks that you're trying to sort out what would. And then I wondered if an additional question is, might it not be a good idea? And
sure.
Have you considered that in your, your role? And
yes.
at what point would you redirect?
Yes, we actually are in the process right now of hiring a firm to help us review our model and make suggestions. And we did have an initial concept that was small, that that survey, that proof of concept survey, but we are in the process of hiring another conservation finance specialist to help us review the model, see if we need to make changes. We feel that it's very well demonstrated that there's the need for funding, especially for monitoring and maintenance, which is particularly hard to get money for. But we may need to change our strategy in terms of how we're working with businesses. And again, that was one of the points on the previous slide here, is really we can't leave out the strength that individual donations will bring to us. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah, we actually put out an RFQ and got some responses at the end of March. So we're reviewing that. Oops.
And thanks for this. This is great. A couple of questions and comments. One, can you describe kind of the type of products that you potentially would put your label on or potentially offer a certification?
Yes, so it really runs a pretty big gamut of people that we're working with right now that have had some interest. Certainly anybody who has a direct relation to like river recreation is a candidate. That would be like paddle boards or fly fishing rods, things like that. And that is a good match. A lot of those businesses are seasonal, so they're not having really high revenues. The other thing I think that we have targeted are larger corporations that are going to have products, say in Walmart or grocery stores, and have that logo there, so that it's really readily identified by consumers, so that ultimately they would then be driven to those companies, and that would be creating that reward cycle and that circular flow between nonprofits and consumers and businesses.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And then, your last bullet, business to be less attracted with a regional corporation, organization. And I think it totally depends. We're working with some Fortune 500 companies that only want to work with, a WWF, a TNC, because that brand just kind of pops and there's confidence around governance and things like that. And then just as big companies who really want to work with much smaller local and regional players. And so I don't think you can just do kind of one broad brush. I think it really is a segmented market. The key, I think, is just to try to find maybe some corporations that are doing a lot of giving in the environmental and kind of ecotourism space, and just look at the types of organizations that they're giving to and try to pitch them individually.
Okay, thank you.
And on your fourth, oh, go on, Galen.
No, go for it.
No, you go.
Okay. I've got a few comments here. Thanks for this presentation, and awesome to learn about this program. So kind of building off some of these other comments, I am left really curious about how you might kind of crystallize the value proposition to your corporate partners. And I'm thinking both in terms, you kind of played up there's kind of a matchmaking aspect to this, right? You're going to help their giving more efficiently, connect them up with the right NGOs. That's leaving me kind of curious how you can get very clear, to the extent possible, with your NGOs in terms of what are the conservation outcomes, what are the impact metrics. And I think as you're in kind of early growth stage, those could be, intermediate outcomes. So maybe their initial metrics around kind of capacity building to get to, this stretch of river miles or something like that, to get very clear on kind of those outcomes. And then I think that'll help you kind of think through then where are those corporate partner opportunities. I kind of assumed you would have mentioned the river rec space. I'm kind of curious about agricultural partners that depend, especially in the Western US, depend on these rivers for water, for irrigation, and how you might be able to, tap into that more through articulating some conservation outcomes around kind of ag water and ag use. I guess I'm curious if you've had any kind of early interest or leads in kind of the ag space on that. And then I think that all relates to, some of these other questions about regional versus local. I think it totally depends on kind of what are your NGOs offering and what do your corporate partners want, and really leaning into that matchmaking and digging into, how can you make sure that you're finding a clear, clean value proposition on both ends, the NGO, that you're serving, and the corporate partners that you're serving.
So you asked me a couple of questions. If I could just follow up on your last comment about leaning into the matchmaking. To me, so when I was talking briefly about the community grants program and saying we were holding off bringing on new river partners because we wanted it to be meaningful, and we didn't want to have a lot of people take the time to apply when we couldn't fund that many. But bringing in those grant partners could certainly, is certainly a way for us to help define the benefits on the ground to corporations. So maybe that matchmaking piece, maybe we're accidentally delaying that matchmaking ability, and maybe we should work really hard to get more money for that particular grant program, which is, very open to communities and is not very restricted, so that we could then use that, sort of do it the other way instead of get the corporation. So we get the money to fund, get those grant partners here, so then we can share those stories with the corporations and get that kind of that storytelling piece, that matchmaking piece.
I think one other, and you asked the question throughout the presentation, but I think finding the right level to operate, meaning local, regional, or national, I think will be key. And just having worked with some other intermediaries, I think going local could create some problems with channel conflict with the nonprofits. The nonprofits are trying to raise money from whatever sources they can, whether individuals, foundations, or corporations. You don't want to necessarily be competing with them, right? Because you're going to raise money, take overhead, and then provide it to them, which isn't optimal from their point of view. And a lot of those local players, they're interested, say, in a specific river, right? So they'd rather give to the nonprofit that focuses on that river. So that kind of pushes you up, in my view, towards at least the regional and maybe national. And I think that's where you mentioned your value proposition would be kind of at that national level, where these NGOs don't have the capacity to reach out. Could you have these relationships with national corporations or national foundations and direct some funding to these NGOs? And I think from their standpoint, that'd be great if that was another avenue. But I think then, that does put you into the regional or national level, and that may be a little bit harder to find corporations that are interested in that specific area. So I think kind of fine tuning it, maybe it is a regional or, at least, Western US type focus. But I think it's finding that balance between not, cannibalizing fundraising for your NGOs, but still finding the foundations or corporations that have enough interest in this area.
Okay, thank you.
Dan, something that I thought with the efficiency angle was the pooled aspect of taking a larger sum from a national or more regional aspect, and then not have that corporation having to do 10 grant outs, but they're doing one grant with Ann, and then they're able to disperse. So there's that streamlining that is part of the value. But Maki, you had a point, and you ceded to Galen. I want to bring it back to you.
Yeah,
if it's still active.
Yeah, so I was just looking at this fourth question here, and also Todd's questions about it as well. In general, certification processes are really difficult for everyone involved, and they're generally not helpful. Because from your end, you'd have to build out the framework by which you would judge whether or not someone deserves your certification. From a company's end, they have to go through that process, which is time intensive. And the main benefit of a certification, especially for a product, is that they're able to charge more for it because a customer recognizes that certification. So unless you're a brand where a customer knows that, the logo, the certification, it's a hard sell to make to a company. And then, like you're saying, many companies, I work more with food companies, but many companies that sell to the Walmarts or the Costcos of the world, Walmart, Costco, those big brands, they have a say in what the label looks like. And there's a really difficult process in getting everything on there that those big brands require in order to sell those products in the store. So in general, certifications are really difficult, but I think that there are other ways to partner with companies and allow for them to use their logo on their website, on different materials that they sell. That's not necessarily their product.
Sure. Yeah, it seems to me too that leading with the trademark is putting sort of, in a way, the cart before the horse, and that, there's lots of different, like you said, there's lots of different ways to get that logo out there. And the more we can return the company's investment by great stories or volunteers for their day of service, the more likely then we might be able to find the logo in their communications. It's kind of my thought.
I found myself.
Sherry. Okay, go ahead. We have about 30 seconds, a minute, so jump in. But this has been a fantastic conversation.
Well, very briefly, I found myself wondering if you might have a higher return to go deeply with one or two than to go broadly with many, and develop a relationship where there really is a nexus of some corporation who cares for reasons that are kind of tied into who they are, and using that as a bit of a pilot and a strengthening, and then growing from there. So that was a thought to share.
Awesome.
Great thought.
Thanks, Sherry.
Thank you.
And fantastic job.
Thank you all.
Dolphins. Well done. A round of applause. And also Dolphins, maybe afterwards, if you're thinking of anybody who's traveled this road before Anne, that can share some of that, lessons learned, might be super helpful. Christina, if you want to share your screen and start getting ready. But thanks again, Anne. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
Hello. John Winter, our executive director, is also going to be co-presenting with me. We are the Rensselaer Land Trust. We have a contract with the New York State DEC for the Source Water Protection Program, and we need bridge financing.
Thanks, Christina. Let me start. As Christina said, I'm the executive director of RLT. We're in the capital region of New York State, and we have a $1.5 million grant to conserve water around the main water source for about half the county, about 165,000 people. Okay, our work is to engage willing landowners to sell us conservation easements or fee simple properties either around the shores of the reservoir. The reservoir is about 6-7 miles long, and along the tributaries that feed into the reservoir. We already have the grant. We've been working on this. I think this is our 4th year, and we've just applied for an extension to continue the work. This is a new program. It was a new program then from the Department of Environmental Conservation. And as Christina said, we're looking for bridge financing to help us address the, let me go back and say, this is a reimbursement grant, okay? Christina will talk more about kind of the details of the money side, but essentially we have kind of 2 components. We engage the various vendors, the appraisers, the surveyors, the phase 1 folks, and we work with the landowners to purchase the properties. And we're doing we've closed on 2, and I'd say we've got probably 8 in process, and we'll probably end up with about 15 total transactions over the period. So I know our time is limited, so I will turn over to Christina to talk more about the financial part.
Yeah, as John mentioned, the mechanics of this funding are that it's a reimbursement program. New York State DEC provided us with a 25% advance of $375,000, which we've basically spent. And the remainder of the grant comes in at 75% of what we document as the total cost. Our entire match for the grant is coming from bargain sales because we pay the landowner 2/3 of the appraised value of the property, which overall yields the required 25% match on the grant. One caveat there is that match is only available when the project closes. What's happened as we've rolled out this program is what we went into writing the grant. We assumed we would be able to hit our 600-acre goal in 5 or 6 transactions, and that's not turning out to be the case. It's going to be more like 15 when all is said and done, which means we have much more transaction costs because there's more transactions. The other thing is that that we're getting more interest from landowners in doing easements than in fee title acquisitions, and the easements are valued considerably less, usually about half of what a fee title acquisition is valued at during the appraisal phase, which means meeting our entire match through bargain sales is harder. And then the other big issue we have is that the match doesn't come in till the end, and the reimbursement is as you go. We need bridge financing basically to keep the pipeline moving. What our best estimates are from the current mix of projects is that we need about $250,000 to keep the pipeline moving, to do those 10 documents that DEC has to sign off on before we can get approval to go to closing. We think we can do this with $100,000 in revolving fund with ongoing reimbursements from DEC. In addition, we need bridge financing for about $750,000 of acquisition costs. Our basic strategy here is that we're trying to group the closings into 3 groups to minimize our financing costs, and have this larger loan amount out for the New York State reimbursement time, which they're currently estimating as 4 to 6 weeks. What are possible sources and strategies that we've been exploring is for the is kind of 2 different tranches, one for the pre-acquisition expenses and one for the acquisition expenses. For the pre-acquisition expenses, the land trust has about $45,000 identified through internal borrowing and our land acquisition fund that could be used for this purpose, and that we need to raise an additional $55,000 to $75,000. With the major places we're looking is at our major donors and or a line of credit, and then using the regular reimbursement process at 75% to replenish the revolving fund and keep the pipeline moving. On acquisitions, we're looking again at grouping them for closings and to seek low or no interest short-term conservation loans. We've identified 3 potential sources of those. The Open Space Institute that we have a relationship with, we hold an easement on a piece of land they just rematriated to the Stockbridge Mohansi tribe on the Hudson River. Norcross, which several of our partners have used, and the Conservation Fund. The biggest challenges that we face is board understanding and acceptance. While we've been in existence 35 years, we're on our 3rd executive director, we've never taken out a loan except from a couple rare occasions from board members themselves, and never for more than $25,000. That means we don't have an institutional borrowing track record, which could be an obstacle. In particular, some of the requirements for collateral, like for example, Norcross will not allow land as collateral, and that's the main thing we own is land. We also have the fact that this is kind of a moving target. There is a bit of uncertainty in the final project components. We've got projects in the pipeline. Not all of them make it. It's a long bureaucratic process to get to closing day, and not everything makes it. The other challenge that we have is that certain things like interest on loans and the interim property taxes we have to pay between when a project closes and when our tax exempt status goes into effect are not grant eligible. So we actually, in that pipeline revolving fund, we need to raise more than what the grant will reimburse for.
Christina, I think you're doing wonderful on time. You got 2-minute warning.
We're done. I will take more feedback.
All right, I'll give you 2 extra minutes.
Good.
Awesome.
So I just so that everyone kind of understands kind of what we're dealing with here, and just so we're clear and not vague. Think of it as this kind of, as Christina said, there's kind of 2 tranches here. There's the transaction costs, which keep coming, okay? On, maybe 10, as I said, 15 transactions at the same time, okay? So those the documents themselves have to be reviewed by the state, okay? So it's a lengthy process for the landowner, okay? So that's tranche 1, about $250,000, okay? tranche 2 is when we finally get to closing, which could take a year, okay, or more, because as I said, the state needs to review all these documents, okay? We need the bigger dollars. So it's like we need a lot of, not so much money for a long time and a lot of money for a short time, kind of simultaneously, okay? As we said, if we try to, close in a couple different groupings simultaneously, maybe a year or two from now, okay? And I will say too, just so it's clear, but we haven't really kind of gone down this path yet with the state. They want to see this succeed. So if there's projects in the pipeline and we need an additional extension, they're okay with that, okay? So it's not like there's a drop dead date where everything has to happen, okay? Or this all ends for the landowner, okay? At the same time, as Christina said, the only projects that are reimbursed are the ones that go to closing, okay? So we're not really in a position to deal with the landowner who thinks this might be a good idea, and we go all the way through and pay the costs. If we don't close at the end, then the land trust eats those transaction costs and their labor costs and what have you. Okay, so I'll stop there. As I said, we're looking for bridge financing for 2 pieces over several years.
Thanks, John, and thanks, Christina. There's a lot there to react to, so I'm going to pass it off to the Dolphins.
Yeah, just a clarifying question first. You said you went in with some assumptions that in maybe 2 or 3 deals, you could reach some of your goals in terms of acreage, but that hasn't played out. Is that just simply lack of willing sellers for those larger parcels, or are there other reasons?
No, because this is a source water protection grant program, the original idea was that we would have larger ag properties, okay? But when the conservation easement template came out, okay, it wasn't particularly marketable to farmers for, as you can imagine, the buffers, need to be respected. And essentially the ag community, here we're talking kind of smaller farms, okay? And when you take land out of production to create the streamside buffers, it's not really attractive to them. So we ended up with residential landowners as lots of smaller deals in, say, the 20 to 100 acre range, as opposed to, as Christina said, 3 or 4 $200 or $300 acre deals. Which makes sense. I mean, it is a source water protection program.
Question, is your conservation easement sort of a pro forma that you're not reinventing it each time, that you're rolling it out, take it or leave it, or are you doing it, are you
it's the state's template. Okay, so they give it to us, and it has a couple different how shall I say, kind of add-ons. So if you're doing there's a separate section. If you're doing forestry, there's a couple of add-ons. So you can essentially, the template works for everybody with the add-ons that are particular to each transaction. So that's one good thing. Well, the landowner either accepts it or they don't.
Yeah. I think there's a piece of this that I'm not getting, and it's probably because I've never done a land transaction in New York. We do them all the time in California. And so my first reaction to this is, that's great. You have a $1.5 million grant. That's one source of funding. There are, and here I'm talking California or West, there are numerous other state sources of funding. There's mitigation funding. There's all different pools of federal funding. There's water agency funding. There's high net worth individual funding. There's, potential earned revenue carbon. I mean, these are probably too small for carbon deals, traditional carbon deals anyway. But there's so many different sources of funding that I would think, okay, when you look at a potential deal, you look at all the different sources of funding that could come together. And then, this could be actually the cherry on the top, or that helps offset your cost because it's reimbursable afterwards. And I imagine your land trust was around before you got this grant and you were able to do deals. So I'm just wondering, is there some kind of prohibition in this funding that restricts your ability to raise other funding, or or, you know, why don't you use other sources of funding to supplement and complete these deals?
Christina, I've talked a lot, so if you want to tap in, that's fine.
No, go ahead. That's a good question. There's not a lot of land, there's not a lot of fund sources in New York that pay for actual acquisition. There's a well-established conservation partnership program with the Land Trust Alliance that helps with organization building and transaction costs and such, but those are already covered by the grant. They don't cover the actual acquisition. So we'd be looking at individual donors or doing a capital campaign for land acquisition, essentially.
And there aren't any other, I mean, because honestly, if you're out here, well, there's a million public sources that you could use, but if you couldn't, you know, we'd provide funding or I'd give you the bridge loan. I can't do that in New York, unfortunately, but I imagine there are a bunch of foundations in New York. None of them would support land acquisition, or even if they don't, would they have a program related investment effort that could provide the loans in this case?
Well, well, thank you, Dan. That's exactly what we want to hear. You know, our you know, PRIs as an option for us. We kind of have just gotten to this point in the last kind of, you know, few months where we, you know, decided that we were going to extend, you know, again. There's, how do I say this? There's a couple of things going on in answer to your question. We're still doing deals outside of this grant. Okay, you know, so, you know, there's lots of other, you know, types of projects that we work on. You know, we're small, but we have a lot going on kind of, you know, simultaneously. But we came to the Dolphin tank specifically for guidance on how to address the financial shortfall around making this grant work. Okay, so yes, we could go to other sources to enhance the match. Okay, you know, and that would make, you know, that would make more landowners be, you know, possibly interested, but that really hasn't been a problem. Okay, it's not like we don't have people to spend the money on. Is that the timing of the money doesn't quite work with the state kind of, you know, system and, you know, our own, you know, our own endowment, so to speak, or lack thereof. You know, so we're looking to kind of make this work in the short term, in the 2 to 3 year term, to be able to close all the deals.
Right. Yeah. And you're certainly not alone with that reimbursable grant problem. I mean, that plagues many of our partners. And yeah, I don't know the foundation landscape in your particular area enough, but I know the questions. I mean, we do PRIs for this all the time. And the questions I ask, the first question, which is the one I did ask, you know, what are the other sources of funding? Let's look at those. Let's go through the different state programs. I mean, in California, I could say, did you look at EMP funding, or did you look at SALC funding, or WCB or Coastal Conservancy? All those pools of funding to say, you know, why are we just going after this one state program? So looking at that first, then I'd look at your ability to repay. But this is a pretty good collateral that you already have this grant awarded. So from that standpoint, from a financial standpoint, I think it would be compelling for foundations. But you know, the thing I'd really want to see up front is that you've turned over those rocks and looked for other funding to supplement this before we would allocate our investment capital.
Dan, I'm going to jump in one quick. Dan, what kind of a hurdle is the I haven't borrowed before from you? Is that something where you'd need a co-signer from TNC New York, or is it you're okay with the first time borrower?
If they have the $1.5 million, you know, I'd be totally fine with that, right? It depends on the security, but you hold some other land. I mean, I don't know, you know, without looking at all the detail, but that would not be a big hurdle for us.
Yeah, thank you. That's good to hear. You know, because it's been something we've been concerned about.
Yeah. And just for the record, one of the prohibitions on the grant match is it can't be other state funds. State funds can't match state funds.
That makes a lot of, I figured there might be something like that.
Sounds like the hurdle is more acclimating your board to accepting a loan it sounds like you have resources for a bridge loan, and you could probably finance it, and you can structure that, but it strikes me that it's working with your board to break this barrier.
Yes and no. We've been working on them for the last 6 months, knowing that this is coming up, that to spend this $1.5 million, we're probably going to have to go in debt for the first time. So we're getting there. I don't think that's going to be insurmountable.
You know, and I should say, folks, thank you for this so much. We're thrilled. You know, we're usually out there asking people to donate easements and land. You know, to be in a position to actually buy them, you know, is actually kind of thrilling. You know, so, you know, it's just kind of, for us, it's more like, how do we make this work so that the land trust is in a position, both ability to repay, you know, ability to kind of keep the deals going, you know, over months, because as Christina said before, we're probably looking at, you know, 10 to 12 documents for each one. And if we're doing 10 of them, you know, or 15, it's 150 documents for the state to review. So it's a long kind of, you know, trail that we have to kind of, you know, get along here. And as they said, you know, we're trying to limit, you know, the amount of interest expense that we'll have to pay, because that's not reimbursable. Okay. So we kind of want to have if we go into the commercial sector for, you know, for financing, how do we make that, the time that we have the money out, as short as possible? That's what we're trying to kind of structure all these. And it sure would be great to find a foundation who would give it to us for, you know, no interest or really low interest, as opposed to, you know, going out, you know, to the, you know, to the local banks to do it.
And we're also looking at the short term, the first tranche of financing, to keep the pipeline moving as an opportunity to build a longer term land acquisition for projects outside the source water protection program. That if we can set up that revolving fund now, it'll help us with the other parts of our program as well. If there's a way that we can structure it, that would make us happy in the long term.
We have had success with some bridge funders who also will give a grant at the same time to offset your interest. So you could bear that in mind as well as you consider your 3 or so resources, and just boldly request that is a shortcoming for this first time venture, that you've got this public source. I mean, it's pretty well knitted up, and a grant of $15,000 or $20,000 at the same time as the bridge loan.
That's a great idea. Thank you. That's a really good idea.
So we've got about a minute if other Dolphins want to jump in. Steph, I'll encourage you to share your cover slide just as we get prepped up. But yeah, Todd and Sherry, Gail and Dan, Maki, if you have anything else to add for a minute.
I'll just jump in briefly. You know, great challenge that you have. Awesome to hear about this work. I was curious about some of the points that Dan, you had made, because my mind immediately went to PRIs, and I wasn't sure if they'd have a challenge with collateral, given that they've got this reimbursable grant. Seemed like that could certainly work. You know, there might also be a pitch to just some more traditional kind of philanthropic donors to try and get kind of, you know, looser money that doesn't have to be repaid, but you kind of commit to them, hey, we'll be able to pay this back to ourselves in X months, and then we'll redeploy it right into the next conservation deal. And so it's not necessarily a loan, but you sell to them that their gift will be revolving. Might be a way to do it. And watching your presentation, my mind went to, I would really love to see, and you possibly have this, but I would love to see kind of a simple snapshot financial model over quarters or years, because you're just dealing with a timing issue. And so if you project that out with time periods, and you can kind of really quickly itemize, here's the time period where we've got a cash flow problem, might even be an opportunity to work with a board member on that, if you've got a board member who's really into kind of financial modeling, because then you can potentially get some board buy-in if they're kind of developing that, and they can kind of quickly see, oh, this is just a timing issue. There's not anything bigger. But anyways, awesome challenge you have there.
Yeah, can I make one final point that we didn't talk about, and that's looking to partner with other NGOs, other land trusts, whether they're local land trusts or regional land trusts or national land trusts. Some of these may have more reserves that they earmark for land protection. And at least, I've seen it in different locations, they'll partner and maybe make a loan. Now, what the interest rate will be, I think you mentioned the conservation fund, they obviously do that, but they charge like 5% now. I think maybe someone is on here from the conservation fund. But I wouldn't rule that out too if there are other land trusts that are operating that could help you with the capital.
Thanks, Dan.
Sherry,
go ahead.
I would not let the opportunity pass personally to give feedback to the state of New York that their funding program has a hardship. And so I don't know anything about that bureaucracy, but I certainly would provide that information because that's important for them to know.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that because, Sherry, because the grantees have gathered together and have, met with the Division of Water folks. I should say, when this came out, it was in response to a series of drinking water problems in several parts of the state. Okay, and it was kind of the program was designed quickly to respond to that. Okay, what we're seeing now is kind of right. It's kind of saying, okay, so what does this actually mean for smaller organizations who are now dealing with multiple transactions at the same time in a reimbursement model that takes time to get the money back. So I think we kind of everyone kind of sees how to fix this, but we're the guinea pigs who have to live with what we got. So,
well, a lot of great advice from our Dolphins. So thank you very much, John and Christina, for presenting. This is a common problem. I'm sure there's a lot of people on the call that have this issue or will face it soon in the future. So really glad to have you guys presenting and getting that feedback in real time. And Steph, I see you are on video and look like you're ready to go.
Yes, let me go ahead and share my screen. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me today. I'm very excited to be presenting to and brainstorming with you all. My name is Steph Harris. I'm the commercial director on the carbon markets team at 3 Degrees. Been with 3 Degrees since 2015, and I oversee all of our purchasing and sales of carbon credits, as well as supporting origination of new carbon projects. So we're going to pivot a little bit, and my discussion topic today is going to be focused on the role that carbon markets, specifically the voluntary carbon market, can play in the development of new, what we call nature-based carbon projects. So quick agenda for the next 10 minutes. I'm going to give you a brief introduction about what 3 Degrees does, why I'm here talking to you today. Talk about some of the trends we're seeing on both the supply and demand sides of the market, and then get into what is the problem statement, business opportunity that we're looking for some guidance on. So, just a bit about 3 Degrees. We're a mission-driven organization. We help businesses, their customers, take urgent action on climate change. We do this by helping leading companies, utilities develop and execute clean energy and decarbonization strategies. I also like to mention we're a very proud certified B Corporation. And so we have 3 primary business units that all work to support this mission. We have our environmental markets team, which includes carbon markets. And we've been focused on originating, developing, and financing renewable energy and carbon credit projects for over 15 years. And as one of the largest voluntary credit suppliers in North America, we have a large, diverse project portfolio of both renewable energy certificates as well as carbon credit projects. We also have a consulting team that works with global companies creating climate strategies for those companies that are looking to make their energy decarbonization plans more impactful. And then we have a utility team that supports utilities who offer voluntary green power programs and green gas programs. But the focus today is on carbon markets. So our carbon markets team has essentially been in the market since the market's inception. We actually develop and manage different types of carbon credit projects, have developed over 50 projects to date, have dozens of new projects in our pipeline. My team essentially works on the ground with projects managing the monitoring, reporting, and verification processes, which are actually required to create the carbon credits, adhere to the different standards bodies and methodologies that exist for nature-based and other projects. Although our work has historically been focused on methane capture projects at dairies and landfills. So, as we all know, protecting, restoring natural ecosystems are of the utmost importance today. And so we really want to build out our portfolio of nature-based projects, and figuring out the best way to do that is why I'm here talking to you all today. And just to set the stage a little bit more, forestry and land use projects is one of the, if not the largest contributor of carbon credits to the voluntary market. As you can see, I've highlighted here over 107 million carbon credits. That represents 107 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent were issued from nature-based projects in just the first half of 2021. We anticipate those numbers to continue to grow. Most of these credits come from large-scale RED projects in Latin America and Asia, RED being reducing emissions from deforestation and degradation. Our focus, we want to be more on North America and more on improved forest management projects or reforestation and afforestation projects. But the takeaway here is that the market also is really recognizing the importance of nature-based solutions. So trying to figure out how we can ensure that these solutions will scale and the market can achieve the intended impact. And so what are we hearing from our customers? We know that corporate companies and even utilities are setting more aggressive climate targets, like long-term net zero. And we know that carbon credits will play both a role in the short term as well as with long-term decarbonization strategies, particularly using carbon credits to address residual emissions once all other internal carbon reduction strategies have been implemented. We also know that prices have been rising pretty quickly in the voluntary market, particularly over the last 12 months. So more of our clients want to know, what does future pricing look like so they can start to plan accordingly. Given that specifically the voluntary carbon market is still pretty nascent and relatively illiquid, it's hard to predict what pricing will even be like later this year, let alone having a realistic or credible forecast for 10 to 20, even 30 years from now. A lot of our customers are also looking to us to help them build these long-term strategies and identify new opportunities for investments in new carbon projects. They also want us to help identify what are the risks, and they want us to play a role in reducing those risks for them. And then each buyer has a really unique set of needs that they need to meet when it comes to reaching their climate targets. And so this slide shows all of the different considerations buyers take into account when they're evaluating opportunities to invest in new carbon projects. What is the appropriate investment structure depending on how much risk they want to take on, how much capital do they actually have available today, or do they just want to lock in a stream of future credits at some fixed price? Buyers also need to consider the types of projects they want to invest in. Where are those projects located? How many credits will that project produce? And how does that compare to the amount of credits they'll actually need in the future? And then we also help our clients think about what types of claims do they want to make? How can their investment in new projects help them achieve their climate goals? And then maybe even more relevant to this group, what we're seeing on the supply side is that first off, having a robust pipeline of new project opportunities requires building direct relationships with landowners or other organizations that have access to viable projects. Since our projects, 3 Degrees projects, have historically been with landfills and dairies, renewable energy projects, we don't currently have a really robust pipeline of new opportunities. The space is also crowded. There's a lot of companies that have been working with forest carbon projects for a long time. So figuring out how to slot in there is a little bit of a challenge for us. The process to create carbon credits from land use projects, particularly forestry projects, requires very specific technical expertise, some of which 3 Degrees can currently provide because it translates really well from our work with other projects. But in other cases, this isn't work we're able to do ourselves right now. You know, for example, we don't have a forester on staff. So that is work we'd have to contract out to someone else. And you know, my personal opinion is that the value in this market lies in actually being able to create credits to adhere to the different standards and methodologies. There's a whole bunch of intermediaries and resellers popping up in the market, and everyone thinks they know how to sell credits, but they don't actually know what it takes to create those credits in the first place. And
2-minute warning stuff.
Thanks. And then finally, you know, developers and projects are looking for access to buyers who are willing to make long-term commitments at high fixed prices. A lot of folks we talk to are feeling very optimistic about future carbon pricing and maybe even their own ability to market or sell credits themselves. So even though we have a really robust customer base of, you know, hundreds of corporate clients, many of which are Fortune 500s, we're trying to figure out how we fit into the equation as we think about really trying to build this business organically. So leads me to our problem statement. We'll call it our business opportunity. We know there are specific needs on each side of the market, and we think 3 Degrees uniquely, you know, sits in between. And so how can we act as the bridge between both sides of the market? Do we start on the supply side and try to build that first, you know, building out technical expertise, relationships with landowners, or other organizations on that side? Should we bring together and aggregate buyers and then try to find a specific project, or is it doing both at the same time? And then we know there's a lot of risk in investing in new carbon projects and being able to maintain them over time. You know, carbon projects are required to make commitments for at least 30 years, depending on the standard you're using. And so how do we adhere to that time frame? 3 Degrees can bear some of that risk, probably not all. How much risk should the projects hold? Do our customers hold any of the risk at all? And then just in general, if the intended outcome is to mitigate carbon emissions by protecting, restoring natural ecosystems, how can we just make that happen more quickly and take that urgent action?
Awesome. Is that time?
That's it. That's it.
Nailed it, Steph. No, that was a great outline of where you are and what the opportunity is. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from our Dolphins about what they think about this strategy.
Well, I'll jump in and I'll say, as someone who just completed a pilot project with a firm in the voluntary market for improved forest management, your questions are great. I'm inclined to think from what I've learned through the process that it is complicated and time consuming, about 2 years really. And I just, with your questions here, I find myself leaning into the focus on the side of cultivating the producers, who's going to have those credits. Not, I think you're going to, the market is there. It's been my observation, but really seeing and maybe having a niche for developing who you can work with and what you need to work with them. So for example, if it's land trusts who are emerging into the market, and for whom it's pilot, or if it's more sophisticated repeat customers. But I think developing that, then you would know how to, excel in that niche to start with. But that's my sense. But I think the buyers are there. I wouldn't start there personally.
Yeah, just doubling down. It's certainly a complicated area to be working with. But we'll reiterate what Sherry was saying about that the buyers are there. One thing I've recently been having conversations around is the fact that there is certainly a lot of interest on the buyer side, but there isn't a lot of availability of high quality projects on the buyer side. If you're not the Microsofts of the world, you're losing out on some of the more high quality projects. So that's one thing that I've been seeing people have an interest in. Another area is that, these big, mostly forestry, carbon, MRV technology companies like Pajama or Selvera, many of them are thinking about starting to create projects in-house. Of course, that brings a degree of maybe conflict of interest as to which ones they end up prioritizing for the verification processes. But that's also an area to think about as to if and how you would partner with those folks to reduce that conflict of interest that many of them are facing as they're thinking about the supply side as well.
I guess, from my side, it seems like your organization's had some success in methane capture and other types of carbon crediting markets. Why move into this space? It's complicated, it's crowded. It doesn't seem like you currently have the in-staff competitive advantage in this space. So sure, we all want to diversify and grow, but why take it on? It's not an easy space to quickly kind of make your mark.
Yeah, that's a great question. We're seeing at first there's demand from our clients and wanting to retain our existing client base and also be able to grow it, at least even stay relevant with what our direct competitors are doing. More of our clients are also looking to expand their portfolios into more carbon removals. And so nature-based projects, certain nature-based projects offer that as it's not low cost, but lower cost than technology-based removals, direct air capture credits that some of these tech companies are buying at $600 a ton. This is more feasible at maybe $20 to $30 a ton. And so the demand side, I agree, the demand side is there. And we think, part of it is the competition, staying relevant, and being able to expand our current internal expertise. So part of that is the diversification that you mentioned as well. There's been questions about, do we partner? New companies that are emerging that are coming up with what they claim to be more efficient solutions for MRV or whatnot. But I think what we're finding is it's really like the project acquisition tends to be the most challenging aspect of this. And so how do we build that? Is it organically? Is it M&A activity or something else? We're not exactly sure yet.
I'll jump in. And first, I'm a big fan of 3 Degrees overall. Dan Calafatis was a business school classmate of mine. So I've been talking to him about this for a long time and actually worked with 3 Degrees once. And I thought that was an interesting model around, what I would call local carbon, or someone called charismatic carbon, which I didn't like, but you get the idea where you have a buyer and a seller kind of in the same geography, right? So there's a more natural link, and it would come from, really working on both sides of those transactions. I'd also say, the question that you're posing is a fundamental question for your business model. And so I'm hesitant to take it on directly, because I know you likely know much more about this, and your company knows more about this, having looked at it. But I will put one point that you're probably thinking about, but I would just emphasize is when you're looking at this, think about the overall impact and the co-benefits of doing something like this. There are a lot of carbon projects that I think are actually negative for the environment, right? And just because we say it's nature-based solution, it's not good for nature. So if it's, you're planting non-native trees somewhere and trying to get carbon credits for that, I mean, that's something that, as a conservation-focused foundation, we would oppose, right? We try to stop that. So I think, you're a B Corp, you have the environmental mission, but really thinking hard about that, because there's huge variability in the actual conservation impact of a lot of these projects.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I think one of the reasons why we another reason why we want to expand more into this space is the scalability of that impact, making sure we do it correctly to minimize any negative impacts, but the potential benefits could be even more significant than what we see with our existing project base that are relatively small scale, 10 to 20,000 credits a year. You need a lot of those projects to really scale that impact. And we think, forestry or other nature-based projects can help us get there more quickly. But, I totally hear you needing to make sure we're doing that in the right way.
2 minutes. I see Galen going off mute. Call it in Todd and Maki and Sherry again, but we have 2 minutes.
Yeah, I'll jump in quickly. Dan, thank you for that point. I was going to jump in exactly with that. I think, there's a huge advantage here if you really kind of nurture an ecological carbon portfolio. I think increasingly that's going to be a big differentiator in the market compared to like industrial poplar plantation sort of crap. So that's one area. I would triple down on the supply. I think demand, you'll figure that out right now, but if you can figure out supply, you're going to be ahead of everybody. It's kind of interesting to think about how important the landowner network is to the carbon players and how integral that is to the land trust community. So I've seen this kind of left and right where carbon developers partner or try to partner with land trust. But I think if you can really, figure out how to effectively partner with land trust and capitalize on their landowner relationships, that's a really interesting angle to navigate. And I just haven't seen a lot of successful examples of that. I think there's often just like the business models don't jive, but fundamentally we're trying to do the same stuff. So I think there's a lot there potentially. Beyond those existing land trust relationships, I do wonder, especially given how crazy demand is, I keep wondering if developers and firms such as 3 Degrees should get more interested and focused on, capital intensive land acquisitions, more like the TIMO model, where you're really driving the ship by doing some strategic investments in purchasing land yourself. But obviously that's a capital intensive model, but I think it's worth considering right now as we're thinking about how to develop this. And I hope we don't lose the landfill methane and dairy methane capture, coal mine methane. I mean, these are some of the best, carbon solutions right now, even though they're not nature-based necessarily. So I don't know if you could kind of bundle those into a portfolio so you don't lose that, but maybe you can bring up the value with some more nature-based products to kind of diversify there.
Galen, I'm going to jump in and plus one you on the land trust outreach, but also I'm a musher, as you know, and Forever Our Rivers was the first one as an aggregator of conservation groups. I'd encourage you to look at whether it's Southern High Plains at TNC or I'm trying to think of other, Port is the Partnership of Rangeland Trusts, and there's other like, collectives of land trusts that you might look into to be that resource for like the pre-development of carbon projects. Steph, oh yeah, go ahead, Sherry.
I was just
I'll give you
say,
20 seconds.
On that point, I'd be happy to talk with you offline because I feel like having gone through it, I've learned a fair amount about what I'd like to share back out to a developer as a land trust.
That sounds great.
Awesome. So thank you, Steph. That was a fantastic overview of the issue. Big thank you to all the presenters. I know thank you guys already, but thank you to presenters and thank you to the Dolphins for giving that action-oriented advice. This is not our academic exercise. This is real problems and real suggestions for moving these things forward. So I'm going to hand this off to Lee for our last couple minutes to wrap things up.
Thanks, Jackson. And if you see me with a big dumb grin on my face, this has just been a stellar session. I hope that our very brave project proponents got a lot for their participation. I know from an audience perspective, just hearing some of the feedback from the Dolphins, it helps to spur a lot of insight about where the market is, where certain project types might be viable or not, and different directions and momentum that could hopefully contribute to great and meaningful impact for your conservation efforts. So I want to thank our Dolphin pod for swimming with us today, and especially our very brave presenters. It's always hardest to recruit the projects. If you can't tell, it takes a lot to, put your questions and what you don't know out in front of a live studio audience, if you will. So that's it for today, and also for the series. So for those of you who stuck through with us to the end, I just want to thank you for joining us in this learning lab, in this kind of learning evolution and growth. My sincerest thanks to my colleague Jackson Moeller, our dear partners at Highstead, led by Tara on the conservation finance team, and really just to everyone who's made the time and prioritized joining us remotely for these sessions. As told, we do really appreciate your feedback. That will help us figure out if we can do this again. I certainly think it would make a lot of sense to do so. And also, please do think about sharing these with your colleagues, with others in your organization. The recordings are available through the Highstead website on the Learning Lab landing page. We'll have this recording up again too. So just from the bottoms of our hearts, thank you all for participating. This has just been a blast, and we hope to do it again soon. Thanks, folks.
Thank you, Lee.
Yeah, thank you.
Cheers all.